Hello, greetings from Basel in Switzerland to you wherever you are who see and hear these videos of sermons. We're in a series of sermons on the book of Acts, and we've come to the middle of chapter 23, and we'll look at the rest of the chapter today. You might remember that Paul is in Jerusalem and has been mobbed in the temple and dragged out, and a mob was trying to kill him, and the Roman commander came with soldiers and arrested him because he seemed to be the cause and took him into the barracks. And Paul said he was a Roman citizen, and that alarmed everybody. And then the commander brought him to the Sanhedrin, the parliament or the Supreme Court of Israel, to find out what the charges were. And Paul said that the problem was that he believed in the resurrection, which is true, and he meant the resurrection of Jesus, which some of the others did not mean. And the parliament was divided between Sadducees and Pharisees. It was an extreme form of identity politics, as it were. People didn't identify with the issues. They identified with their identity as a party member or their heritage. And the Pharisees believed in the resurrection, and the Sadducees did not, and did not believe in the supernatural, actually, either. And so they began to argue with each other, and the argument became violent, and the commander rescued Paul out of that violence and took him up into the castle of Antonia, and had kept him there waiting to see what to do next. And that's where we left it last time. So beginning in verse 12, we read, "The next morning some of the Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul." So the Greek says they had cursed themselves, which was a typical form of oath that people would say, "May we be cursed with this and that and forever excluded from Israel," or whatever it may be, if we don't do what we're promising to do now. This was something that was commonly done, and it was very damaging to the culture and to the people of God because it used God's name in a way that brought it into disrepute and in a dishonest way, as in any way of swearing by something else. So they would swear by God, by God's name, by His holiness, or by anything else. We swear by our mother's grave or by our lucky stars or anything. And what that means is that I'm not taking full responsibility for what I say, but I'm guaranteeing what I say by forging the signature of God or my mother or whatever else it may be that I swear by. And the Jews had come into very minute discussions of, if you swear by the altar, it's not really binding. But if you swear by the sacrifice that's on the altar, then that is really binding. And there were lots of little legalistic nuances to what really is an oath, what really is a curse. But they would swear by the temple and by the altar, and everything that they would swear by was demeaned and just made an object. And there was actually a forgery of taking the responsibility from the person who was saying something and putting it on something larger. And this is the main reason that Jesus taught against swearing. He said, don't swear by the temple, don't swear by the altar, don't swear by the gift on the altar. In fact, don't swear at all. He had this kind of thing in mind. He didn't have the kind of thing that you would sign a business contract with no counter signature, just you are responsible, or that you would make public and legal and written promises in marriage that you would swear to be loyal to your husband or wife. He didn't have that in mind. He had this kind of thing in mind, that we should let our yes be yes and our no be no, and take responsibility for what we say. So that's what these people were doing. They called down curses on themselves unless they killed Paul and promised not to eat or drink, thinking it would surely be less than 24 hours before they killed Paul. More than 40 men were involved in this plot. So it was an extreme form of cancel culture. They didn't like what Paul was saying, and so they wanted to kill him. They went to the chief priests and the elders, who would have been Sadducees, and said, "We have taken a solemn oath," the Greek says, "with a curse we cursed ourselves, not to taste anything until we have killed Paul. Now then, you and the Sanhedrin petitioned the commander, the Roman commander, to bring him before you on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about his case," which would have attracted the commander because he wanted more accurate information also. "We are ready to kill him before he gets here." This may have been ill-conceived because it meant that they would have had to fight against and overcome the Roman soldiers who were guarding Paul in order to kill him, and they maybe had not thought that through. I'm not sure. Verse 16, "And when the son of Paul's sister, Paul's nephew, heard of this plot, he went into the barracks and told Paul." We're not told how many of Paul's relatives were living in Jerusalem, but clearly his sister and her son. And the nephew of Paul could have been a variety of ages, but probably was a boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old, for a variety of reasons. One is, boys of that age hear everything. So he heard of this plot, and he went into the barracks, and he would have had access because people imprisoned could receive their relatives, and their relatives and friends had to feed them. The food was not provided. So he went in to Paul and told him. Then Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the commander. He has something to tell him." Now, in the last verse we read last time, the Lord had stood with Paul in the night and said, "You're going to Rome." So Paul knows that God has promised and purposed that he will not be killed in Jerusalem, but he doesn't just sit and wait for God to do his thing. He takes action as well. He called the centurion, and he would have had the right to call the centurion because Paul was a Roman citizen and the centurion probably not. So he had quite a stature. So he took him to the commander. The centurion said, "Paul, the prisoner, sent for me and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you." The commander took the young man by the hand, drew him aside, and asked, "What is it you want to tell me?" Now, I think the fact that the commander took the boy's hand indicates that he was quite young as well. He said, "Some Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul before the Sanhedrin tomorrow on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about him. Don't give in to them, because more than 40 of them are waiting in ambush for him. They have taken an oath, who have cursed themselves, not to eat or drink until they have killed him. They are ready now, waiting for your consent to their request." The commander dismissed the young man with this warning: "Don't tell anyone that you have reported this to me." Then he called 2 of his centurions, 2 commanders of 100 soldiers, and ordered them, "Get ready of a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at 9 tonight." That is a huge contingent of military. It's half the forces in Jerusalem. Why is he making such a big deal about this? It may be that Roman citizens were rather rare in Jerusalem, and Paul was a Roman citizen, and also the commander had committed a crime against Paul. He had arrested him, put him in chains and ordered that he be flogged. Although he wasn't flogged, the commander had done those three things which it was illegal to do to a Roman citizen unless they had been convicted of a crime, not accused. So the commander must have been very nervous and very concerned that nothing else happened to Paul, because he was on very thin ice. Provide horses for Paul so that he may be taken safely to Governor Felix. Paul would only need one horse. I think it says horses because very probably Luke and some others would go with him. He wrote a letter as follows. Claudius Lysias, the name of the commander, and his original name was Lysias, which is Greek, and he took the name Claudius, which was the name of the emperor at the time, when he received Roman citizenship, actually when he bought it. To His Excellency, Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews, and they were about to kill him, but I came with my troops and rescued him, for I had learned that he is a Roman citizen. Now, this is very, very clever, because he doesn't say anything false in this letter, but he leaves out quite a bit of significant material. He doesn't mention that he arrested a Roman citizen, that he put the Roman citizen in chains. He doesn't mention anything about the first episode of people trying to kill Paul, only the second episode when he did know that he was a Roman citizen. So he's withholding any damaging information about himself, but he's not lying. He's just leaving some things out. I wanted to know why they were accusing him, so I brought him to their Sanhedrin. I found that the accusation had to do with questions about their law, but there was no charge against him that deserved death or imprisonment. Now, you may remember that the first charge which the people were making against him in the temple when they started the riot was that he had desecrated the temple by bringing a Gentile into the part of the temple that was reserved for the Jews. And that was actually a crime punishable by death, and the Romans would have allowed the Jews to execute Paul if he were convicted of that crime. But they seem to have dropped that completely, probably because there was no evidence. The people in the conspiracy were willing to kill Paul, but they weren't willing to bear false testimony against him, which is an interesting combination. When I was informed of a plot to be carried out against the man, I sent him to you at once. I also ordered his accusers to present to you their case against him. So the people in the Sanhedrin will have to go to Caesarea, which was about 100 kilometers or 90 kilometers, in order to attend the trial and to make their accusations. So the soldiers, carrying out their orders, took Paul with them during the night and brought him as far as Antipatris, which was about 60 kilometers. And it would have been very late at night when they arrived there. And then the next day, after a bit of a rest, they let the cavalry go on with him while they returned to the barracks, because Paul was clearly safe and the conspiracy wouldn't attack him on the road. When the cavalry arrived in Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor and handed Paul over to him. The governor read the letter and asked what province he was from. Learning that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will hear your case when your accusers get here. Now, he asked what province he was from because it could have been from a province that was governed by a client king of the Roman Empire, and then Paul should be sent to that king for judgment. When he found out that it was Cilicia, he decided to hear the case himself, because the capital of Cilicia is Tarsus, and Paul grew up there. And also, if he had sent Paul to Cilicia, to Tarsus, the Jews from Jerusalem would have had to go all the way there, which would have been extremely inconvenient. And the governor didn't want to antagonize the Jews. He needed to have a good relationship. So he decided to hear the case himself when the people from Jerusalem got there. Then he ordered that Paul be kept under guard in Herod's palace, which was a palace built by Herod, and it had been taken and was used as the praetorium, the barracks, and the headquarters of the military that was in charge of the province of Judea or Syria. So we see in this passage that God is sovereign and in control, and we also act. It's a 200% situation. It's 100% God and 100% us. And one expression of that is a kind of a proverbial saying that is good to keep in mind, and that is, pray as if you could not work, and work as if you could not pray. God bless you. Amen.